Okay, so 10 questions to review your learning. The answers will appear in 5 seconds, so you're probably going to have to pause the video. I can't imagine you'll be able to do them in 5 seconds. All right, there are the answers. Check your answers against them. Any issues, get in touch, ask questions, please, and keep studying. So we are now looking at specific cellular defenses as opposed to non-specific defenses that we looked at in the last video. So here are the key learning points. So pause the video and just have a quick read through these key points, and then we'll come back to them at the end of the video. Okay, so all cells have antigenic markers or antigens on them. They're usually made of protein. You can see here that some of these will be antigenic markers. And basically, to simplify it, there are self and non-self antigens. So your immune system is looking out to see if there are any pathogens in the body that have non-self antigens. In other words, they don't belong in the body. Whereas your own cells that obviously do belong in your body, they have antigen markers that tell the immune system that they belong there. So there's self antigens and non-self antigens. So we're going to look at a type of white blood cell called lymphocytes. And lymphocytes are specific. So we've come across that term before. They are specific to the antigen or the antigenic marker that is found on the pathogen. So remember, the pathogen is the organism that causes disease. And on the membrane of the pathogen, there is an antigenic marker. And you can see that not all of these lymphocytes would be able to bind to that antigenic marker. Only one of them has the correct receptor in its membrane to be able to bind to the antigen. So it is specific to that particular antigen. And what happens is that lymphocytes, once they bind with their receptors to the antigen, they then undergo what's called clonal population. So a clone is an identical copy. So what happens is that the lymphocytes start to divide, reproduce, if you like, and produce a huge army of identical lymphocytes with the same shaped receptor specifically for this particular antigen on this pathogen. So obviously, if you're being invaded by a pathogen, you're not going to be invaded by one pathogen. There'll be a huge number of pathogens coming into your body at one time. So you're going to need a huge number of lymphocytes in order to fight them off. So that's why this process takes place, to produce basically an army of identical lymphocytes that will specifically attack this particular pathogen that has this particular antigen. So that's lymphocytes in general and how they work. We're now going to look at 2 types of lymphocytes. We're going to look at B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. And a simplification really is to say that B lymphocytes will attack pathogens that are outside of our cells, and T lymphocytes will attack cells that have been infected. So let's have a look at the B lymphocytes first of all and see how they work. So there's our lymphocyte with its receptor site. Yeah, remember that specific to the antigen. And B lymphocytes work by producing large numbers of Y-shaped proteins called antibodies. Okay, so these are the Y-shaped proteins, and these antibodies have receptor sites on them that are specific to the antigen on the pathogen. Okay, so what they can do is that these antibodies combine with the pathogens and basically deactivate them, stop them from moving around the body, and they can keep them in one place. So another diagram showing what's happening. So we've got our antibodies here, these Y-shaped proteins with the receptor sites just at the end there, and they bind to a specific antigen on a pathogen, deactivate or inactivate the pathogen, hold it in one place, stop it from traveling throughout the body, and then the immune system works together. So if you've got your antibodies that have deactivated this pathogen, holding it in one place, well, along comes a phagocyte, which we learnt about in the last lesson, and they carry out that process of phagocytosis. They engulf and digest the pathogen, and it's destroyed. So they work together. Now, sometimes B lymphocytes can respond to antigens on substances that are not pathogens. So sometimes the most common example, I suppose, is hay fever, where you have an immune response to a substance that enters your body that isn't dangerous, it's harmless. So pollen comes into your body, and pollen has on it antigenic markers, and that provokes an immune response from the B lymphocytes. So when your body reacts to something that is harmless, when the B lymphocytes respond to antigens on a substance that's harmless, we call this an allergic reaction. Now, this diagram at the bottom, you do not need to know this level of detail at all. All you need to know is what is an allergic reaction. An allergic reaction is the reaction or the response of B lymphocytes to something that's harmless. So that's the B lymphocytes. You might want to go back and have a look at that and review that. But B lymphocytes, they produce specific antibodies. The antibodies hold the pathogen and deactivate the pathogen, and then phagocytes come along and carry out phagocytosis. And that happens outside of cells, outside of your cells. However, sometimes, and quite often, pathogens will enter and infect your cells. And then if that's the case, T cells or T lymphocytes come into play. So how do they work? Well, when a pathogen, for example, this virus here, when a virus comes into your body, what it does, this is the protein coat of the virus, and what it has done, the virus has actually just injected its DNA into your cell. So this is your cell here, the inside of the cell, the bluey bit, and the viral DNA will be within your cell. Your cell is now infected by the virus, but the virus leaves behind its coat, and on it there will be antigens. So what T lymphocytes do is they destroy the body's cells. So they don't destroy this virus bit here. They destroy this blue bit, the actual infected cell of the body that has the viral DNA inside it. And the way that they do that is by stimulating or causing a process to take place, which is called apoptosis. And it's basically a program of cell death. The cell, in effect, kills itself. So we'll just explain how that happens very simply. So the T lymphocyte with its receptor, because all lymphocytes have their receptors that are specific to particular antigens. So this T cell detects a foreign or a non-self antigen on the membrane of this infected cell. So the pathogen that has infected the cell has left behind an antigenic marker that tells the T cell that this cell has been infected because it's a non-self antigen. So what the T cell does is that it releases proteins which diffuse from the T cell, from the T lymphocyte, into the infected cell. And these proteins, they stimulate the cell to produce self-destructing enzymes. And basically what the cell does is it almost digests itself. It breaks itself down. It destroys itself through the use of these self-destructive enzymes. And that process of the cell destroying itself is called apoptosis. But it's stimulated by the release of the proteins from the T lymphocyte. So how does that help the body? Well, you can see here that the infected cell has been destroyed, and that usually stops the pathogen, and usually a virus, of replicating. Particularly in the case of viruses, they want to get into your cells to replicate, to reproduce. So if you can stop them reproducing, well, that's one good thing. But the other thing that happens is that once the cell has been broken down, lying in wait is an army of phagocytes, and they will basically mop up and engulf and digest the remains of that cell, including the pathogen that was infecting the cell. So you just need to know about what an autoimmune disease is, or an autoimmune response as well. So normally T lymphocytes are able to distinguish between self and non-self antigens on infected cells. But sometimes this can go wrong, and actually an autoimmune disease is when the T lymphocytes of the immune system begin to attack their own body's cells, even though they're not infected. So there's a number of examples there of types of autoimmune disease. The one that links to the diagram is multiple sclerosis. And you can see at the bottom that the cells that are actually being attacked by the T lymphocytes are actually cells surrounding the neurons, the myelin sheath. So I'm not going to tell you, but have a think. If the myelin sheath is being destroyed or damaged by the T lymphocytes, what impact is that going to have on that person? Okay, so we talked previously about this clonal population that's produced. So when a lymphocyte comes into contact with an antigen of a pathogen, it replicates, it produces lots and lots and lots of identical lymphocytes with the same receptor for that particular antigen. Now, some of these cloned B and T lymphocytes are actually called memory cells. And they're called memory cells because they stay in your body for a long period of time after you've been infected by the initial pathogen. So the pathogen will enter the body, you'll have an infection, the clonal population will take place, and some of these will be memory cells, and they will stay in your body for years, potentially, waiting just in case the same pathogen with the same antigen ever comes into your body again. So what's the response if the pathogen does come into your body again? Well, you can see the diagram here. So this is the first time that the antigen of the pathogen has come into your body. And you can see the primary response. So this is increasing concentration of antibodies in the blood. And you can see that the primary response takes, in this case, nearly 20 days from first exposure to having the maximum number of antibodies in the blood. So what's the benefit then of having these memory cells in your body? Well, you can see two benefits of the memory cells from the secondary response. So if you imagine this is the second time that the same antigen has come into your body. So it could be years later that the same antigen comes into your body. But because you've got memory cells present in your body, can you see two major differences between the secondary response and the primary response? Well, the first difference is that in the secondary response, you can see that there is a much greater concentration of antibodies produced in the secondary response than there is in the primary response. You can also see that the response is much, much quicker. So in the primary response, it took 20 days to get to that level, whereas in the secondary response, it's taken only 10 days to get to a much higher level. So that means that over time, because of these memory cells, your secondary response is so quick and so strong that sometimes if that pathogen comes into your body again for the second time, you don't get any symptoms because your immune system destroys it, fights it off before it has a chance to get hold in your body. The final thing that we need to know about is HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. So HIV is a virus that leads to AIDS, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So HIV viruses in general attack specific cells. So the HIV virus attacks and destroys T lymphocytes. And we've seen how important T lymphocytes are in your immune system, in destroying cells that are infected. So what happens over a period of time is that the HIV virus, because it's attacking and destroying some of your T lymphocytes, you end up with a depletion or a shortage of T lymphocytes. And when you have a shortage or a depletion, this can lead to AIDS, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So basically you have a weakened immune system because you don't have as many T lymphocytes, and potentially it leaves you vulnerable to infections from, well, infections that normally, if your immune system is working fine, wouldn't be a danger. So things like pneumonia and influenza or the flu. Generally speaking, in this country, if you had pneumonia or the flu, then you'd fight it off no problem with your immune system. But because of the weakened immune system caused by this virus, then potentially that can lead to death. So have a look at the key learning points again. Pause the video and think carefully what your questions are. Go back over the video again if there's areas that you struggle with.